in Canada. Jeff is keenly focused on understanding how a business can transition its operations in an increasingly carbon-constrained world and how it can drive value for all parties to a transaction. Jeff is also a volunteer director with Quest, a national not-for-profit that supports communities in Canada on their pathway to net zero. And he, like me, holds a Master's of Economics. Jeff's Master's is from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and before that he has a Bachelor from the University of Manitoba. So please give a big round of welcome to our panel. So I'm sure that many of you found Janice's report and the overview very interesting. I'm not sure if all of you guys could see the details on the slides, especially in the back of the room. But if there is particular aspects, after the panel, we will do a Q&A. And for some of the technical aspects, I also, in addition to our wonderful panel, we have some engineers in the room who have expertise on batteries and power engineering, and also I think we have a planner. So all kinds of questions, hopefully we can learn what the answers are. So in terms of some questions for our panel, let's start with looking at the Ottawa area, our regional grid. Trevor, we've heard some of the advantages of energy storage and the benefits. What does this look like from the perspective of a local distribution company? So what looking forward the next 20 years, what do you expect to see?
Yeah, thanks Angela, and thanks everybody for having us here. I do have a very cool job, in part because I get to come and talk about things that I'm really excited about, like battery storage and the energy transition. Just a quick refresher for everybody. Hydro Ottawa is part of what you can consider the provincial grid, so all of Ontario is interconnected when it comes to electricity. The electricity that we use here could have been generated kind of anywhere in the province, transmitted over transmission lines, and then it's the job of local distribution companies like Hydro Ottawa to distribute that to our customers, kind of that last line between the electricity grid and our customers. We serve most of the city of Ottawa. Our service boundaries are not exactly the same as the city limits, but most of the city of Ottawa is within Hydro Ottawa's service territory. So in terms of where we've come from and where we're going in the context of the conversation today, in the last 20 years, actually the last couple of decades, we have seen relatively flat demand growth. So that means that as we've added more homes and businesses to the provincial grid, we have also done things like conservation. So we've changed out incandescent light bulbs for CFLs and then LEDs. We've improved our HVAC technology, how we heat and cool our spaces. So that means the growth of electricity demand has been relatively flat for the last number of decades. But we are currently at an inflection point when it comes to that. We are seeing, and Councillor Curry did a great job of explaining this, and Janice as well, we are starting to see significant increase in the demand for electricity. People want more electricity from the grid. There's a bunch of different drivers for this. So electrification is one. We are changing how we power our vehicles, from gas engines to electric vehicles. We are changing how we heat our spaces, moving from fossil fuel combustion to heat our homes and businesses to heat pump technology using electricity. But we are also seeing a significant increase in the energy demands for things like data centers and the densification of computing power. So as a quick example, a chat GPT search uses about 10 times more computing power than a normal Google search. So all the AI that seems like it's coming at us every single day, there's something new, that all requires more and more and more power. So these are all drivers that are causing the utility companies to say, we need to provide more power. And you saw the stat earlier, we're looking at about a 75% increase in demand from the grid over the next 25 years or so. And just to put that into context, the modern grid's been around for, give or take about 100 years. So what we did in the last 100 years, we kind of have to do that over again in the next 25 or so. We need to grow our grid. And there is no single solution. There's no one magic bullet that's going to solve all this problem. We can't just build our way out of this. We can't just rely on battery storage to provide that power. It is a combination of all the tools in our toolbox, of which battery storage is a really, really important one. So I think I won't get too much into the details yet. I think some of the other folks up here can get into that. But battery storage is a really important tool for the utility moving forward and how we manage our grid needs and how we provide customers with power when they need it, where they need it, and making sure it stays affordable. And it's also an important tool for our customers themselves to be able to manage their own power consumption, to be able to manage their own affordability when it comes to power consumption. I think I'll stop there and I'll let some of the other smart folks up there talk about it.
Okay, I think that was a really good introduction. Let me just check, can all of you guys hear the panelist microphones well? Yeah, I'm getting thumbs up from the back. So there's going to be tremendous change coming in the next 25 years. That's definitely, I think, one of the main takeaways. I'd like to turn to you next, Andy. So Nokia is a global company, but you have a very large investment and presence here in Kanata. Companies like yours and others in the high-tech sector are really at the forefront of the energy transition. So what is happening behind the scenes at Nokia that's driving this transformation in your own power needs? What does that look like?
Sure, and maybe I'll just give just a quick sort of background to make the situation a little bit clear. But Nokia's got about 85,000 people around the world. R&D is done in many, many different locations. Typically with R&D, you have to have large labs. Labs require a huge amount of cooling. And in the landscape of our company, the largest single lab in the world, and again, we're a fairly large research and development company, the largest one in the world is in Ottawa. By far the largest energy user in the world is also in Ottawa. In Ottawa, we have 2,200 people, we have 1,400 engineers. Engineers design and invent products. Those products need to get tested out. They get tested out in labs. The products typically are equipment that's used for communications equipment. It produces, by the way it's designed, you have semiconductors that are all over these products. They create heat. So you use electricity to power them, creates heat, and then you have to cool the heat off, so you have to use air conditioning to cool it off. So you're basically consuming electricity twice for the products. And so for the way that we operate and think about our business is you have to locate it in places that are efficient and competitive, that have good R&D people, but have electricity that's efficiently produced and reliable. And you need infrastructure that goes around that. So why is this stuff important? It's important because you have to have, one, a supply of electricity that's going to grow. Each product we do targets the reduction of the amount of energy you need per bit and the cost per bit to consumers. So those are all positives, but each generation you invent also creates much more electricity because it's jamming in 10 times as much capacity. So the labs and the buildings that we have will use more electricity over time. We're using a little over 10 megawatts right now. That will go up by about a megawatt a year. We're going to build a whole new campus down the street, but the electrical demand will keep going up and up. AI will generate an incremental set of demands, especially if people localize their compute capability. That will put increased capacity demands on the grid. So I think I just want to give just a general background on how this works, why we use electricity, how we use it. On the green side, and this may not sound green, but on the green side, everything that we use, all the energy that we use to cool basically creates heat. So basically in the next building that we're going to build, we're going to use that heat that's created to heat the building, but just a sales pitch, but we'll have about 8 times as much energy to give away. And I say give away, but we need partners that we can basically transport the energy to and they can reuse it. But back to the electrical grid, really important is capacity growth everybody in this area certainly will be using more, and I think Trevor said, hey, Hydro Ottawa's been flat, but it's going to go up, and we're in a bit of a change period. For people that work in the tech sector, they've typically been an upward angle for quite a while. AI will drive that further up because compute takes more electricity. What's really important where battery banks come in is the grids, more or less, when you talk to hydro, is you're at, from a planning perspective, this area's at the end of the capacity of the grid. So redundant, reliable activities like battery banks help reduce the peak demand on the system. It allows growth to go on even before investments go into place, and it allows an economical trajectory on the growth. The other thing it does, and I mean this is a fairly basic thing, but electricity is cheaper at night and more expensive during the day. Battery banks work well because you can charge them at night and electricity is a little bit less. I mean, you turn them on when the grid's at absolute capacity during the day, so it really levels out the need to use on-demand carbon, burning things basically to create electricity. So it's got a bunch of positive attributes. I think there's a whole pile more that can be done because these things can supply. Certainly we have generators on our campus and we'll have a massive amount of generating capacity that's needed unless you can do that in two ways. You can either do it by burning fossil fuel or you use a battery bank. So I think in a lot of our thinking is that these battery banks would provide sort of four useful solutions that would offset the need to use either incremental generating capacity or carbon negative generation solutions, and provide a fairly stable, reliable supply of electricity in the grid. So those are our thinking processes in driving these sort of activities and kind of where our strategies at. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that answer. I think that there's a wide level of knowledge about sort of things from an engineering and power perspective in this audience. So I'm hoping that there's takeaways for all of you. I think, Andy, you did a great job in getting into some of the details of what's happening, but also the generalities. So just the main concept of peak load, that there are really these spikes in how much power Ontario needs, and that if we can deploy energy storage, then we can use the energy storage at that peak load moment, and then we don't have to build and generate, say, peaker gas plants or even worse, like nuclear plants to try to meet peak. That just doesn't make sense. And I think that Janice also told us that BESS, the costs have been dropping, and that in terms of cost competitiveness, energy storage is a lot cheaper than the other alternatives in terms of energy generation. And also, I think, especially for the councillors here, a lot easier than if we had to build new transmission corridors. That would be very troublesome indeed, because it would displace, obviously, a lot of land that has already good purposes. I don't think that we should neglect to also discuss risks, because obviously there's rewards to BESS. There should be rewards for the community, the local community here, both the business community as well as the residential community. But there's also risks, right? And the risks need to be managed. So turning to you, Janice, because you've very recently done all this in-depth look at what is happening with BESS. Your report looks at a number of concerns that are commonly raised about BESS projects. How would you assess the industry's efforts to manage these risks?
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, like I mentioned in the report, in my presentation, the industry has been shifting away from a technology that has caused more of the problems and towards a more stable technology. Some of the analogies I've heard is kind of gasoline versus diesel in terms of flammability and stability, from the nickel, manganese, cobalt to the lithium iron phosphate. So that's one major shift that the industry has acknowledged and has adopted as a standard practice. A lot of the lessons learned when it comes to, again, fire risk have been informing the UL standard that I talked about, and that also is kind of best practice and prevents future projects from having the same problems as the predecessors. So those are the main two reasons that the main two ways the industry has evolved. I think the other pieces are around engagement. So I think the process of engaging the community, engaging the fire department, engaging the municipality is also really important, and has become again more standardized, perhaps more regulated. We heard from Councillor Curry that the province might have a role to play here as well, but the municipality is doing their best to set those rules of engagement, to again learn from best practices and ensure that those are how business happens here in Ottawa.
Okay. I'm going to skip over to you, and Jeff, don't worry, I'm not ignoring you. I'll come to you next. But Trevor, you said that Hydro Ottawa sees not one silver bullet, but sort of all of the above solution, and that BESS is very much part of that. So most of us are regularly passing by various utility boxes. Sometimes they're buzzing, sometimes not. There's these transformer stations. So I'm expecting we'll have battery boxes in that mix. Does Hydro Ottawa have any concerns that this would be increasing our risk level? Are there special precautions that you would take?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember Hydro Ottawa is hyper-focused on safety. And if you've ever listened to one of our spokespeople out there after a storm talking about restoration, the first thing they're going to talk about is how safety is the #1 priority. And that's not just a throwaway line. It's not just sort of, in our vision statement or mission statement. It's something that we kind of live and breathe every day, in part because we're dealing with something that requires a lot of respect and a lot of care, electricity. We would not engage in a technology that we didn't think could be managed, and we trust in our partners, so we work with a lot of different industry partners, from the Electrical Safety Authority to the Canadian Standards Association to the fire departments and local municipal officials, to make sure that whatever we're doing to support our grid needs and our customers' needs is done in a safe way. And as far as we can see, and again, we kind of look to the experts, there is a safe path forward for that when it comes to BESS technology.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I like to keep the audience involved. How many of you have ever been zapped by electricity, like gotten an electric shock? Yeah? Okay, like I remember when I was a kid in Europe and there was a cow pasture and they have the electric fences, and I put my little kid's hand on it and woo! Anyway, so I'm really glad, Trevor, that you folks take safety first, because electricity, it is a dangerous force, right? And also one thing I learned is that the electrical grid that we have in North America is like the biggest machine that we've built, right? So there's a lot of grand structures that the engineers have built, but the grid is the biggest one of them. So turning to you, Jeff. So Brookfield, and Evolugen, I believe, is an offshoot of Brookfield, has proposals to build 2 fairly good sized battery energy storage projects here in Ottawa. So I'd like to turn to you and ask you what precautions or risk mitigation strategies have you been thinking about?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Angela. I have the privilege of serving as head of development for Brookfield Renewable. And Brookfield Renewable is a global company with about 5,500 employees all around the world, Australia, Brazil, US, all through India and Asia. And so what's really interesting about that is I can really leverage all that expertise that we're coming from globally around all the lessons learned. And similar to what Trevor was saying, I guess, as head of development, I'm also head of safety. And so by that, I mean, these projects don't get built unless we meet all of the standards and work with all the partners to ensure that we're implementing infrastructure in a way that's responsible and safe, and it's going to operate in a way that's not going to zap young Angela in the cow pasture. So we take that role very seriously. In addition to that, I've moved to the city of Ottawa about 25 years ago. Ottawa is my home. We've been living in the National Capital Region. I work across the river in Gatineau, Quebec. There's about 500 of us in the building there. So, you know, this community, like every community globally, but for me particularly, this is very personal. You know, my legacy here is about safety first. And so, you know, this is not just about adding some additional equipment to the electrical system. This is very much a mission-driven exercise for myself and the team that I'm working with. So I do want to talk a little bit about sort of the industry and maybe a little bit about the team's efforts in terms of going forward with these projects. The industry itself, you know, I think what's exciting about renewable energy is as you get young people coming into the business, and certainly as you're growing, and Brookfield's been growing over the years, you're hiring young people into the business. They're not just coming there to work, they're coming there because they are, you know, intensely focused on the future, what the future of electrical systems should look like, what the future of the environment is, thinking about how to build sort of the infrastructure that's going to enable us to compete, you know, Nokias of the world with AI and develop those kind of high value added jobs in the cities where we kind of live and work. And so, you know, I think what's really exciting about me and the team is the passion that comes through all of the work that we're doing. And so we all go into work like everybody else here, but there really is a lot of excitement every day. The other thing I'll say about the industry is we've just seen a massive decline in sort of in the cost of the technologies that are enabling that clean infrastructure. So we've seen solar costs come down, we've seen battery costs come down, and it's not just the costs that are coming down, but the performance of the equipment is going up and the safety record is going up. So when you think about, you know, all sorts of things in the built environment, you know, the improvement in terms of fire risk and all that, every single time there's a fire, you know, whether it's in the electrical system or in sort of like an apartment building, there's lessons learned by those events, and the new standards reflect that. And every year, kind of that safety record is getting better and better, and it feeds into what Janice was talking about, you know, moving from NMC into the LFP batteries, moving from these indoor building installations that allow kind of propagation to kind of occur into more containerized modular solutions that limit the propagation. And so the industry is learning as we're going. You know, energy storage is going to be a big part of the future, and I'm sort of excited to sort of see all those innovations and bring them back into the projects that we're building here in the city of Ottawa, which is my city, and I see this as home, and these are legacy projects for me from a personal perspective. Maybe the other thing I'll say is I love the engagement from the community. I know that doing big infrastructure projects, it's disturbing for what people have kind of been doing for a long time. I remember meeting a young gentleman, not that young, actually an older gentleman, who was talking about the transmission line that went through the back of his property in 1932. And he says, there's lots of activity out there. This reminds me of back in 1932 when this transmission line went through. I know that we are coming into these communities, and I know that we're creating a little bit of anxiety around kind of what the plans are. And I'm here to tell you that we want to share those plans. We want to be transparent. We want your feedback. And so I really value kind of all the work that you've been doing, Angela, with your team at cafes. We're engaged with lots of other local NGOs. We're having lots of conversations at kitchen tables. You know, we've launched the website, I think you mentioned earlier, getchargedottawa.ca, whole series of podcasts, more podcasts to come. We've got months and months of engagement here. We're going to do an open house February 23rd, sitting with the council, the committees for council. So we were at ARAC last week. We'll be at Planning Housing Committee next week. And look, myself and the team, we are available. Like, we want to hear the concerns. We want to address those concerns. We've hired a whole host of expert consultants in, you know, groundwater contamination, fire safety, equipment design, et cetera, et cetera. I want to enable all of those people, and I want to make sure that your concerns are being addressed in sort of a responsible and sophisticated way. So, you know, that's sort of the pledge that I make, and that's, you know, for us, this is exciting. We love doing it. You know, obviously it's tough to work in a fishbowl, and we got to do our homework, so we might not have an answer immediate for every single question, but I will guarantee you that we will get you an answer for every question that comes up.
Okay, this is gonna be unscripted. Can we make a deal here, Jeff? Wait.
This really is unscripted.
Let me put the deal on the table. I'll let you re-announce the URL of the website slowly so everybody gets it. You get free promo moment. And in turn, you will promise that there is going to be some kind of a contact form, and if people have questions, they can put the question in, and within a reasonable time frame, one of these experts that you're hiring and the many engineers will, as substantively as possible, actually send back a real answer. Can we have that deal?
We can have that deal for sure, Angela. Yeah, no problem. We get that advertise the website again.
Yeah.
So it's getchargedottawa.ca. So getchargedottawa.ca. All one word. Yeah.
Okay, so,
Do we have it on any of the poster boards back there? We'll put it up.
okay.
Yes, no, I mean, this is important. We want the engagement. You know, the open houses are a way for you to come in and talk to the experts. And then, you know, down the line, we'll do a town hall so you can hear all of the questions that have come up and all the answers. And so, you know, we're multiple months of engagement here, and we welcome it and we encourage it.
Okay, so that's great, and I hope we'll see many of you at the open house, but I know in my learning process, it goes step by step. So if any of you have like serious concerns, there's an offer for answers. So back to the regular script here.
Oh, and just one little caveat. We don't have that form on the website right now for the questions, but we will. Oh, we do? Mark's telling me we have it up already. Okay.
Okay, so there is a place. Thank you for that, Jeff. So, in terms of moving back to some of the benefits for the residents and businesses. Janice, I'd like to come back to you. In your report, you have looked in depth at BESS deployment. So how do you see the benefits for both the business community and like just regular residents?
Yeah, again, reiterating what I stated in the presentation there, the benefits for business is to enable more business. So Councillor Curriel has 540, I'm sure she'd love to see 640 businesses here over the next few years. And that's going to take more energy, and that's where we really need those technologies that help us modulate those peaks, those energy troughs and energy peaks without having to produce a lot more generation capacity. So that's where it helps the business side, as well as for frequency regulation and some of those sort of grid support components to help with high quality energy that Andy mentioned is necessary. That's also an element too that batteries can help provide, is that grid frequency service, regulation service. For local communities, there's the components I mentioned there of resiliency, reliability, and economic support. So money, that's always nice to support local projects that communities can decide what they would like to put it into. But also things like reduced outage duration can be
disconnected. Bluetooth pairing.
benefit to local communities that we've seen through Hydro Ottawa's or Hydro One's example of the battery project, as well as the one in Perron, Quebec, can help the local area experience less outages. I'll leave it to Trevor to answer exactly how the area around these particular projects is wired. So and island capabilities. I'm not able to speak to that, but we have seen some interesting case studies in some remote regions that are prone to higher outages be able to benefit from battery technologies. And finally, the resiliency piece around extreme weather events. Again, batteries can be used in unique situations for powering warming centers or places of refuge, or like the Milton, Florida example I mentioned about hurricane outages and having batteries on wheels that can help get to areas that are experiencing outages. So some interesting examples that way too for resiliency for the community nearby.
Wow. Okay. So that's actually a whole list of benefits. So I'm getting signals from Jennifer, who is a member of the board of cafes. By the way, we have 3 board members here today. Pamela O'Donnell also, and Mike Fletcher. Thank you folks for coming. With the shortness of time, I'll do like 2 very short answer questions. So Andy, would you agree that energy is a constraint on investment coming to Kanata North?
It is, and I mean, I think the way I described it is, electricity is the new gold. I think
Okay,
we need to think about it that way.
electricity is the new gold.
There's a phrase for it.
So I have a suspicion that in the same way, and Kathy Curry was presaging this, housing is a critical shortage, and we've had the province come down and start opening some of the permissions for builders to build. And I'm thinking that if energy is going to be a critical shortage, we are also going to see the province have to take position on that. So last question goes to you, Jeff. Why Ottawa? Why did you put in proposals for projects like here in the Ottawa region?
Yeah, a great question, Angela. I guess, I mean, we are a big company doing business all over the world. As I said, you know, Ottawa is home. The government of Ontario, through its long-term procurement, the LT1 that it's referred to, they sort of identified a need for power that you know, I guess Janice and others have talked about. You hear it across the board here. We worked a lot sort of trying to figure out where the constraints in the grid were, where the demand was the greatest. You know, what cities did we think wanted to be leaders in sort of this clean energy? And as I said, I think the staff is very familiar with the area out here, and therefore this became sort of a logical choice. I know that, you know, on one of the projects where it's gone sort of quite well, one of the other projects is a little bit more difficult to kind of get across the line. But what I would say is, you know, we believe that we'll get there. We want to work with the community, we want to build that trust, and we want Ottawa to be a leader in this kind of really exciting industry.
Okay, well, welcome to Ottawa, and also your headquarters are for Evolugen are just across the river, right?
We're in Gatineau, Quebec.
All right, we will consider you a local company. Sort of, across the river. All right, so now, this is actually the most interesting part for me, because I did prepare some of my questions, and I'm hoping some of you guys have been mentally preparing questions. Do we have a roving mic?
Got it right in your hand.
Okay, so this goes here, and this goes here. So can you guys share the two mics we have there? So who in the audience has a question? Right there.
Hi. One question I have just, I guess, about this is the difference between sort of the mass use of batteries versus the in-home use of batteries. You know, the Tesla Powerwall, of course, is the Xerox, the modern day Xerox of home batteries, but there are many others coming on board along that. And I guess my question is, as far as cost benefit, safety, all of these sorts of things, can you guys sort of talk a little bit about the difference between sort of whether you know, what's the advantage of having it as one big source in one location versus distributing it amongst 10,000 homes type thing?
Trevor, do you want to start on that?
Absolutely, yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. It's a really great point of not every battery system is the massive kind of sea containers that maybe people have in their heads. It's that, it's sort of some smaller version of that, and it's the smallest version, which is exactly what you said, the Tesla Powerwall or equivalent system that are in customers' homes. There's going to be a role for all those. Customers in particular are interested, so looking at sort of residential customers, are interested in what can I do to impact my own energy affordability, my own resilience, and local in-home, we call that, the utility, we call it behind the meter, so on your side of the meter. Assets are a really important feature. They do still add grid benefit because it's kind of been alluded to here, we have to build the grid to what you might consider the worst case scenario. So that's on a hot, sunny summer afternoon, everybody's air conditioning is running, business is still running, people come home and they want to throw a load of wash-in or they want to plug in their EV. That's what we designed the grid to. If half of those customers are instead pulling off of a local battery, like in their home, that reduces the draw on the grid, and it means we don't have to build as much to that grid. There's benefit for the customer. You're not paying those sort of peak pricing rates that are charged during that time, and there's benefit to us because it's not drawing on the grid. So there's absolutely a role for that. we can look at those. This is maybe getting a couple of years down the road. We can almost look at that. There's a term called virtual power plant. So it's we use those assets almost as if it was a power plant in and of itself, because it's providing some capacity on our grid. So absolutely, there's a role for those. I can't really speak to the safety part. Again, that's kind of, there's ESA, there's CSA, there's a lot of different entities that look at how do we make sure things we put on our homes are safe, whether they're electrical things or other things, and this would fall into that.
Can I just take another crack at that too? I'm an economist, so I immediately jump to economies of scale. And I think, what's so important in Ontario to remain competitive is that we do need competitive electricity rates. So there's a role for batteries in the home for sure. I will kind of use the analogy of like going and picking up something at the convenience store. It's very convenient, but it costs you a little bit more than going and buying something at bulk at Costco. And so, while there's a role for convenience stores, there's also a role for these large scale batteries, because we can drive the cost down and to serve some of the big kind of industries and regions that we need. And so I think you probably need both. And that's the beauty of batteries. It's very modular, right? Like some of us have batteries in our pockets in our homes. We've got power walls, as you mentioned, and then we've got these grid scale batteries. And so, that's one of the things that's really exciting about this industry. And if you get a chance to look at the panels in the back there, just the sheer number of batteries that are going into the electrical system, it's very, very important to drive the cost down, to increase the capacity utilization of the entire grid, and they're very modular, which is quite exciting for us as a company. We see a big future in it.
Okay, I think you're trying to be very inclusive, Jeff, when you say some of us have phones with batteries in our pocket. I imagine that everybody does. So we all rely on batteries, but they're different sizes. So Andy, I have heard that Nokia is talking about a 10 megawatt battery, a battery energy storage system. Is that true?
That is true.
And Janice, can you tell us, a 10 megawatt battery, how many homes would that power? Sorry, I'm totally putting you on the spot.
I mean, it depends. It's always going to depend on what it's used for, like how many hours in a day.
But just to give us a sense of scale. Trevor, would you know that? No, you're not that kind of guy.
Martin says 2,000. Let's go with that.
2,000? All right. So Nokia is building a battery that would be enough to power 2,000 homes. Now, would that be for like the whole, I guess the battery has the capacity to do the homes all the time, right? For 4 hours. How does the 4 hours thing work? Can you explain that?
Any energy that you accumulate will have a limited amount of energy, right? So typically, a battery system like the one installed by Brookfield is for a 4-hour period. After that, you have no energy left in your batteries. So when we say, for example, that you have a 10 megawatt system, let's assume 5 kilowatts per house for 2,000 houses for 4 hours is a typical battery system designed for 4 hours.
Okay, and that gets us back to the peak load. So then Nokia would intend to use your battery exactly when your highest needs are.
Exactly. Or where there's an issue with the supply, or also when we're doing backup work. Again, thunderstorm, power goes out in the neighborhood, it'll run basically as an effective generator. If there's supply issues in the grid, it'll back up those as well.
Okay, that is good news for the grid. Okay, sorry, Jeff, I'm going to go to the next question.
Just a quick pursuit on that. That's the impact of that 4 hours of battery storage in the business. In a home, those are the 4 hours that will reduce peak demand on the grid, as I was discussing. That's where we start getting the billions, not millions of dollars in savings in the gas plants and transmissions and nuclear transmission lines and nuclear plants that we need to take years and decades to build. Even more important than that, if those are the 4 hours when the grid goes down, those are the 4 hours that keep your medical device running and keep you alive until you can get boosted for replaced. Those are the 4 hours that charge your electric vehicle so you can get there. So just 4 hours, and depending on the context, those 4 hours are everything. They're the rest of your life and the rest of the life of people you love.
All right, so timing is everything, also for electrons. Next question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm this all right? Yeah, okay. I'm delighted to hear the term virtual power plant being mentioned because that was going to be part of my question. Of course, microgrids are vital in terms of being able to survive outages. I run a microgrid and have been doing so for 9 years with 3 Powerwall batteries, solar, ground source heat pump. I see Mike Fletcher is here too, he runs one. And this gives us a unique opportunity to in fact play on a microgrid, which is a very close replica of the big grid. So we can move power around within our microgrids and pretend we are, in fact, the entire grid. In the process, we learn a lot. And one of the questions, of course, that comes to me as I look out at what other jurisdictions are doing, they're deploying virtual power plants and microgrids at an amazing rate. But in Ontario, we're a backwater. We're not doing that. Why is that? Well, it's quite clear to me why that is. It's political because the policies and the regulations do not permit it. And
What's your question, sir?
and my question is, what is it that this community, all of us, are going to do to try and make sure that the grid gets the stability and all the benefits which you've talked about? We have to advocate, we have to push to try and get these systems put in place so that they will work. The fossil fuel industry is out there lobbying against it, and I dare say our present Ontario government is right on their side.
Okay, I think that's a good question. Like, what can we, the community, do? I'm going to ask, I'd like to know what can the business community do and what can the community do. So, Andy, why don't you start, and then I'm going to ask the mic to go to Mike Fletcher. Mike, you've been doing a lot of community leadership as well, and you're going to answer that from the people's point of view, please. So, business voice.
All right, business voice. So the grid is a grid, and I think it's the key point here is that there's a bunch of inputs and a ton of outputs. And I think from a business perspective, our role in there is to try and make sure that we've got redundant, capable supply. We know with Hydro Ottawa, we try to partner to get those sort of solutions. We know that Brookfield's doing similar sort of things. And the answer lies in a multifaceted strategy. I think it's unlikely that the government will move fast enough to deliver the ramp rate that's needed, especially with AI taking off. So I think these sort of solutions are really, the government is us, and it's hinged by tax growth and all that sort of stuff. So I think these solutions are really critical, and investment partners to help get it done makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so the future of power generation is going to be distributed, not just government, but also businesses. And Trevor, you're itching to talk about DERs.
Michael, forgive me for talking in front of him. So I echo absolutely what Andy said. I do think it's on us to collectively support innovative ways and new ways of solving our energy needs, and that's why Hydro Ottawa wants to partner with organizations, or already is partnering with organizations like Nokia, to come up with these creative solutions of how we can resolve the fact that we can't just rely on the existing grid as it's built today. We can't build double the grid in time. We need to bring in, you mentioned DERs, so distributed energy resources. That's localized generation and storage on our grid that we can use to solve these needs. So I think, like, you know, being supportive of that. Hydro Ottawa, one of our 8-point strategic directives is enable more distributed energy resources on our grid. It's right in our core mission of what we do, because we need that to be able to support our customers.
Okay,
The
so-
last thing I'll say is the government did provide a letter of direction to the Ontario Energy Board. They kind of oversee the regulatory environment in Ontario. In that letter of direction, the government of Ontario did direct the Ontario Energy Board find out or figure out how to enable more DERs. So that directive has been given to the regulatory body, which I think is great news, and it's a great step in the right direction.
Okay, and over to Mike, community.
Great. So I think the community knows about things like DERs that Trevor's talking about, and can just come together to help implement. So, you know, solar panels on a building can be third-party owned, and that can be done many ways with third-party ownership. Somebody has a roof, they don't have the money, they work with a company that's willing to do the third-party ownership. So that'd be, I think that's a great example of how community can enable this. And there are lots of other examples. I was told to be brief. But happy to have a sidebar always. So.
Okay, gentleman in the center.
I've got a sort of a three-part question, probably mainly for Trevor since he's got experience in the grid. I think I heard you describe the power system in terms of generation, transmission, distribution, and then points of consumption. Is that fair?
Yep.
Okay, so, and I think you've got about 20 years of experience working in those systems and so forth. You mentioned there's been some discussion about extreme weather events and impact on reliability and resiliency. Approximately what proportion of the issues that happen are due to generation, and how much is due to transmission and distribution?
It's a good question. I'm not going to have stats for you to be able to say, but so again, as the local distribution company, our purview is kind of getting the power from, let's say, the edge of the city limits to the customers. And so when we are dealing with outage events, it's typically because some aspect of our distribution system has been impacted. Extreme weather is absolutely one of the major reasons. It's not the only one. There are other things that impact our grid. But that can be anything from tree branches hitting the distribution, poles coming down, car accidents, and that. So most of the outage events that we deal with would be related to the distribution system. That said, we do sometimes lose what we call the provincial supply. So we lose a supply from the transmission line because somewhere upstream of us there has been an issue. And again, that issue could be anything from extreme weather to something else. Does that kind of answer your question?
Partially, yeah. So we've also talked about load leveling, and we've talked about transmission systems operating near peak. It has to be engineered to peak demands, and so anytime we can load level by charging up things like BESS systems off peak and then redistributing that makes good sense. But both of those things, from a resiliency, reliability point of view, as well as from a load leveling point of view, would tend to suggest that the optimum place for a BESS is near the point of consumption. Either, we talked about residential systems, but even at distribution systems, right? But if you're going to locate a BESS on a transmission line, right, you're not saving anything in terms of peak demand because you're still having to deliver that electricity through that same transmission line. You follow me?
I do, yeah.
So the point being that if we're going to put these BESS systems, they're not alternatives to generation. You still have to generate power to charge them. And from a reliability, resiliency, and load leveling point of view, you want to locate them downstream, closer to the points of consumption, and not near the top of the food chain, because it doesn't help you there.
So a couple points to make. we operate the grid, and the we here is not just Hydro Ottawa, it's kind of the whole electricity sector. The grid operates at or near peak a very small percentage of the time. So, talk about maybe 10 to 20 hours of the year that we're operating kind of near that peak. The rest of the time, so thousands of other hours, it's operating well under that peak. The more we can utilize that equipment, the better. So charging at night, peaks pretty much never happen at night. Charging at night is a great use of the grid. It's letting more of our equipment, more of that generation be utilized. That makes more economic sense. In terms of where they're located, how close to the point of consumption, I probably look to Jeff to provide a little bit more insight into that. But like Ottawa is a point of consumption. So we currently get power from the Toronto area, the Bruce area, Northern Ontario, kind of all over. So the more spread out that these facilities are, the better. Now there's also a role for that kind of in-home behind the meter, but it's not one or the other, it's kind of all of the above. There is no single solution that's going to solve all the problems. We kind of need all of the above. So hopefully that kind of gets at what some of the questions were. I don't know if Jeff, you have something to add?
Actually, no, I want to cut it off right there. I'm sorry. I'm getting signals that we are at time. It's 1:29, so I'm going to talk for 1 minute. We did ask to have the room till 2, so if you're still hungry, you're allowed to get your second sandwich. If you want to corner one of these panelists, they're also not going to run away. And if you stage yourself by the door, they can't get out, right? So I would invite you to do that. They are like really transformative, smart leaders. So big thanks to the panel. And I would also like to say that it is kind of remarkable that we've had prominent private sector representatives and leaders, a research institute and advisory consultancy firm, a utility, and a local community environmental network, and good representation from our local politicians, and good representation filling all the chairs from communities. So it really doesn't get any better than that. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you at the next Lunch and Learn.